Under the Neon Moon. Las Vegas Stories.
The neon always looks better from far away. Up close, it's just glass and tubes and dust, and the wiring is never as clean as you want it to be. The colors bleed into each other. The red hums. The blue flickers like it's tired. In the shallow puddles along the curb, the signs don't turn into poetry. They turn into long, broken lines that shake when a car passes. After midnight, the city loosens its grip on the idea of itself. The boulevard keeps moving, sure. It always does. There are always a few cars that don't belong to anyone you'd want to know. A taxi sliding by half empty. A shuttle bus with the lights too bright inside. A couple in a rideshare arguing without sound, mouths opening and closing like fish in a tank. But the side streets go quiet. The service roads behind the casinos. The alleys that run under the backs of restaurants. The loading docks. The employee entrances where the security cameras are mounted too high and the paint peels from the door frames. That's where you see what the place really is. Not glamorous, not wicked, just working. Just wearing out. I used to walk those streets because it was better than going home. That sounds like a line someone says to make it mean something, but it wasn't like that. Home was a room with beige carpet that never looked clean, no matter how much I vacuumed it. A kitchenette that smelled like old oil. A window that faced a wall. You could live in it? I did. But if you sat down, you stayed down. So I walked. There was a diner on the east side of the strip, not one of the shiny ones with a gift shop, not one of the themed ones with fake chrome and a classic look that cost too much on purpose. This place was older than its sign. The windows were tinted. The coffee tasted like it had been through a filter twice. The waitress wore the same white shoes every night and the soles were going thin. The booths were vinyl that stuck to the backs of your legs in summer. I'd sit there with a cup of coffee I didn't really want and look out at the street. Sometimes someone would come in and sit a few stools away and we wouldn't talk. That was fine. I didn't come there to talk. I came there to be around other bodies without having to know them. Tonight, I'm back in the same booth. It isn't the same diner anymore. It's something else. The sign outside is newer. The booths are different. The coffee is better, or maybe I'm older and I don't care. But the window looks out onto the same stretch of asphalt, the same wash of neon in the distance, the same pale parking lot lights that make everything look like a security feed. You're on the other side of the table. I don't know why I'm telling you this. That's not true. I know why. I've known for a long time. There's a certain way the night makes you honest. Not the dramatic kind of honesty, not the kind where you confess and cry and feel clean afterward. The other kind. The slow kind. The kind where you finally stop holding your mouth the way you've been holding it, like you're bracing for a hit that never comes. I've carried this story like a piece of metal in my pocket. You forget it's there until you move wrong and it presses into your thigh. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking you to understand. I'm just putting it down where someone else can see it. It started the way most things do here. Not with fireworks, not with music, with a job. I worked in surveillance. That sounds bigger than it was. People hear surveillance, and they think of a dark room with a wall of screens and a man in a suit watching everything like a god. They think of whispers and codes and the kind of eyes that never blink. Mostly it was bad lighting and stale air and screens that needed cleaning. It was guys in polo shirts with the casino logo stitched over the heart. It was headsets with one ear dead. It was coffee that sat on a warmer until it burned. We watched the tables. We watched the slots. We watched the cages where the cash moved. We watched the employees. We watched the guests. We watched the people who weren't guests but came in anyway because a casino lobby is warm and nobody asks questions right away. We watched because the house always wants to know what's happening in its own rooms. My job for the first year was mostly maintenance. Camera numbers, angles, focus, cleaning lenses. Replacing a unit when the picture went fuzzy. Logging small incidents. Tagging clips for review. Timestamps. Filing. It was quiet work. It suited me. I didn't have any special love for casinos. I didn't gamble. I didn't drink much. I didn't play the part. I liked the hum of the place. I liked how everything ran on routines. I liked that you could be invisible if you stayed in the right corners. I had come to the city because I didn't want to be where I'd been. That's as close as I'll get to explaining it. Some people come here chasing something bright. I came here because the light is everywhere, and it's harder to see what's behind you. The casino I worked for wasn't one of the big names. It had a theme, but all the themes blur together after a while. A big facade, a lobby that smelled like perfume and carpet cleaner, a casino floor with low ceilings that made you forget time, a pit that never really got busy except on weekends, a buffet that stayed open late because the tourists needed somewhere to land. Most of the employees lived in apartments on the outskirts, or in rooms like mine. They slept during the day. They ate at odd hours. They carried themselves like people who were always passing through. That's how I met Mara. She worked the graveyard shift in the pit, not as a dealer. She did chip runs, filled racks, moved trays, called for fills and credits. She wore black slacks and a white shirt and a vest that never quite sat straight on her shoulders. She had her hair pulled back tight, not pretty tight, just practical. I saw her first on a monitor. Camera 3B, above the blackjack pit. A wide view. Her moving between tables. Her leaning in close to a dealer and speaking quietly. Her hands always busy, always holding something, always returning it. Later I saw her in person, in the employee hallway behind the casino floor. It was a narrow corridor that smelled like mop water and cheap deodorant. There were vending machines with stale snacks, a bulletin board with HR notices, and a missing cat flyer that had been up so long the paper curled at the corners, a clock that ran 2 minutes fast. I was there with a tool bag, crouched by a panel, trying to fix a cable feed that had been cutting out. She came through with a tray tucked under her arm, and she slowed when she saw me. "You're the camera guy," she said. Her voice was calm, not friendly, not unfriendly, just a fact. I nodded because my hands were full. She watched me for a moment like she was trying to decide if I was worth another sentence. Then she said, "That one's been flickering all week." "Yeah?" "It makes people nervous," she said. "They think it's watching them wrong." "It's watching them the same," I said. That made her look at me differently. Not amused, not impressed. Just a brief pause, like she was filing away how my mind worked. "Good," she said, "as long as it's watching." Then she walked on. That was it. That was the whole first conversation. But after that I noticed her. In a place like that you notice patterns before you notice faces. People become a rhythm. You see them cross a hallway at the same times, take breaks at the same spots, move through the same doors. If someone breaks the rhythm, you look up. Mara never broke the rhythm. She was always where she needed to be. Always on time. Always returning from break with her eyes clear. Always doing her job like it mattered. That kind of person stands out in a casino. A lot of people there were half asleep. Half drunk, half angry, half checked out. They showed up because they needed the paycheck and the health insurance and the hours. They complained about tips even if they didn't work for tips. They made small dramas in the back hallways. They flirted because it passed the time. They stole because they thought they were invisible. Mara didn't do any of that. She didn't flirt. She didn't gossip. She didn't smile much, but when she did, it wasn't for show. It was like a door opening for a second and then closing again. I started seeing her in the diner sometimes after shift. Not sitting with anyone. Just at the counter, eating eggs and toast like it was fuel. 1 cup of coffee, no phone out. Looking at nothing in particular. The first time I sat 2 stools away, she didn't look at me. The second time she nodded without turning her head. The third time she said, "They fixed that camera?" "Yeah?" "Good." That was the level of our relationship for a while. Small exchanges. Just enough to acknowledge each other. Then one night, she slid into the booth across from me without asking. It wasn't crowded. It was never crowded at that hour. There were 2 truck drivers in the corner talking low. A couple in matching hoodies staring at their phones. The waitress wiping the same counter spot over and over. Mara set her fork down and looked at me like she'd decided something. "Do you live close?" she asked. "Not far." She nodded. "You have a car?" "Yeah." She didn't ask me for a ride. Not yet. She didn't ask me anything that would make me feel important. She said, "If you had to go to the desert right now, could you?" I looked at her. Her face didn't change. Her eyes stayed steady. "What kind of desert?" I asked. "The kind out past the lights," she said, "where the city stops pretending." That was the first time she said something that sounded like it belonged to a different life than ours. Like she had a mind that wasn't only built for schedules and trays. I didn't answer right away. "I could," I said finally. "Why?" She took a sip of coffee. "Just thinking," she said. "It's a good thing to be able to leave." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Like she was reminding herself. Then she stood up, dropped cash on the counter and left. I watched her walk out into the night. The door chimed softly. The neon outside painted her shoulders red for a moment. Then she was gone. I sat there a long time after that, even when my coffee went cold. Later I told myself that was the beginning. It wasn't. Not really. The beginning was earlier, and it had nothing to do with her. The beginning was the first time I said yes when I should have said no. In surveillance there are rules. Some written, some not. The written ones are about evidence. Chain of custody. Who can access what? What gets logged? What gets saved? How long footage is retained? How you label clips so that if a regulator shows up, you can hand them exactly what they ask for. The unwritten ones are about power. Who can ask you to pull footage? Who can ask you to look the other way for a minute? Who can ask you to adjust an angle? Who can walk into the room without knocking? I learned those rules fast because I needed the job. I wasn't from the city. I didn't have family here. I didn't have a cushion. If I lost that paycheck, I didn't know what would happen next. So when a pit boss named Caldwell started asking small favors, I did them. Caldwell wasn't a monster. He wasn't a gangster in a suit. He was a man in his late 40s with a shaved head and tired eyes. He'd been in casinos his whole life. He knew where the bodies were buried because he'd watched people bury them. He'd come into the surveillance room like he owned the air. "Need you to pull a clip," he'd say. "From when?" I'd ask. "About an hour ago. Table 12. Guy says the dealer shorted him." I'd pull it. I'd show him. The dealer hadn't shorted him. Caldwell would nod, take the copy, and leave. Sometimes he'd ask for something more vague. "Keep an eye on table 7 tonight," he'd say. "New dealer. I want to see how she handles." Or, "Camera above the roulette wheel is catching glare. Can you adjust it?" None of that was wrong on its own. It was my job. But there were other requests. "Camera 5D is picking up the cash drop on table 15, he said once. "We don't need the exact drop on that view. Too much detail. Shift it a little." "Why?" I asked. He looked at me like I was slow. "Because we're not training the damn thieves," he said. "Shift it." He wasn't wrong about thieves. But cameras exist to record detail. That's the point. I shifted it anyway. It was a small thing. A few degrees. The table still showed. The players still showed. The dealer still showed. But the drop box was out of frame now. I told myself it didn't matter. Later, there were other shifts. Other small changes. The kind you don't notice until you look back and realize the picture is different. By the time Mara and I started speaking in full sentences, I was already used to saying yes. I wasn't proud of that. I wasn't ashamed enough to stop. It's strange what you can live with if you don't name it. Mara and I didn't become friends in any normal way. We didn't trade stories. We didn't go out for drinks. We didn't talk about our families like people do when they're trying to build a life. We had moments. One night in the employee hallway, She stopped me as I was walking toward the surveillance stairwell. "You ever watch yourself?" she asked. "On camera?" I said. "Yeah." I thought about it. "Sometimes," I said, "if I walk through a frame and I'm bored." She nodded. "It's strange," she said, "seeing yourself from above, like you're not you." "Depends how you look," I said. She considered that. "Maybe," she said. Then she walked away. Another night, she was outside on her break by the loading dock, smoking a cigarette in the dull yellow light. I didn't smoke, but I stood near the door because the air outside was cooler and the building noises were quieter. She didn't offer me a cigarette. She didn't ask why I was there. She said, "They tell you everything is recorded." "Yeah? But it's not," she said. "No," I said. She exhaled smoke slow. "People do a lot of things in the not," she said. I didn't respond because there wasn't anything to add. After that, when I watched the monitors, I started seeing the not more clearly. The edges, the blind spots, the moments where someone leaned into shadow. It changed how I looked at the place. It changed how I looked at myself. The first real crack between Mara and the casino came in a way that was almost invisible at first. A woman in a tight dress came up to the cage one night, angry. She said her credit marker was wrong. She said she hadn't signed for it. She wanted to speak to someone in charge. The cage supervisor called for security. Security called for surveillance to pull footage. The footage showed her at the cage signing, her face clearly visible, her hand holding the pen. She kept insisting it wasn't her. She kept insisting the casino was cheating her. Mara was the one who escorted her away from the cage. Not security, not a manager. Mara, because she was there and she moved fast and she didn't look afraid of anyone. I watched it on a monitor. Her guiding the woman by the elbow, not rough, not gentle, just directing. Her leaning close and saying something. The woman's shoulders dropping for a moment. Then the woman stiffening again. Later in the hallway, I saw Mara's face. Not angry, not shaken, just fixed. "People come in here and think they can rewrite the truth," she said, not to me, just out loud as she walked past. I said, "They try." She stopped and looked at me. "And sometimes they can," she said. That stuck with me. A few weeks after that, Caldwell came into the surveillance room and closed the door behind him. That was unusual. He didn't usually bother closing doors. He liked being loud. He stood behind my chair and looked at the monitors without speaking. I waited. Finally he said, "You know Mara, right?" I kept my eyes on the screen. "I know of her." "You talk to her," he said. "Sometimes." He nodded slowly like he was measuring the word. "She's sharp," he said, "too sharp for her own good." I didn't say anything. "She's been asking questions," he said. "About what?" "About procedures," he said, like that explained everything. About who signs what. About why things are done certain ways. About camera angles. My hand stayed on the mouse, but I felt my fingers tighten. "She asked you about cameras?" I said. Caldwell shrugged. "She asked a lot of people, a lot of things." I waited again. Caldwell leaned closer. I could smell his cologne, cheap and heavy, trying to cover cigarette smoke. "You ever hear the phrase, 'don't get creative'?" he asked. "Yeah." "Good," he said. "Don't. If she asks you for anything, you don't do it. You send her to me." I finally turned and looked at him. Why would she ask me for anything? He smiled without warmth. "Because she thinks the cameras tell the truth," he said. "And because you're the guy who makes them look where they look." He patted the back of my chair like we were on the same team. Then he left. The door clicked shut behind him. For a while after that, Mara didn't say much to me. She still nodded when she saw me. Still sat at the counter in the diner sometimes. Still moved through the casino like she owned her own feet. But there was a different look in her eyes when she passed the surveillance stairwell. Like she was counting. One night, she came into the diner and sat across from me again. She didn't ask about my day. She didn't order right away. She said, "Do you believe in accidents?" I stared at her for a moment. "Depends," I said. She nodded once. "There are patterns," she said. "In everything. Even in accidents." She picked up the menu but didn't look at it. "I saw something," she said. I waited. "On the floor," she said. "Not on a camera, with my eyes." Her fingers tapped the edge of the menu, slow and steady. "A dealer made a mistake," she said. "A small one, a chip count. And the supervisor corrected it too fast. Like he already knew it was wrong. Like he was waiting." I kept my face still. "That doesn't mean anything," I said. "It means something," she said. I didn't argue. I didn't agree. The waitress came over. Mara ordered eggs. I ordered coffee again. We sat in silence for a while. Then she said, "You see everything." "No," I said. "I see what the cameras see." She looked at me like that mattered. Like it was the difference between a confession and a lie. "Cameras don't look at what they're not pointed at," she said. "No," I said. She held my gaze. "Who points them?" she asked. I could have answered in a dozen ways. I could have said, "The company." I could have said, "Policy." I could have said, "Me." Instead, I said, "Why are you asking me?" She looked down at her hands. "Because I'm tired," she said. Not in a dramatic way, like someone describing a physical fact. "And I don't want to be stupid." Those words hung between us. When she left the diner that night, she did something she'd never done before. She touched my arm as she slid out of the booth. It wasn't intimate. It wasn't a plea. It was a marker. Like she was saying, "I spoke to you." After that, I started paying attention in a way I hadn't before. I watched Caldwell on camera, the way he moved through the pit, the way dealers straightened when he approached, the way floor supervisors leaned in close to him when they thought no one was looking. I watched the cage, the fills and credits, the signatures, the trays moving from one place to another. I watched Mara. Not in a possessive way, not like a man watching a woman. Like someone watching a live wire and waiting to see where it touches. Mara started showing up in places she didn't need to be. Not often, just enough. She'd pause near the cage a second longer than necessary. She'd glance up at a camera mount as she walked by. She'd stand at a pit entrance and look at the floor like she was reading it. Once I saw her in the employee hallway by the surveillance stairwell. She wasn't supposed to be there. That hallway led to offices and the stairwell that went up to the surveillance room. Most people had no reason to go there. She stood by the door, hands in her pockets, looking at the keypad. I watched her on camera, the feed grainy and high angle. She didn't touch it. She didn't try to enter a code. She just stood there for a long time, then walked away. I sat in the surveillance room and felt my throat tighten. I could have gone out and talked to her. I could have asked what she wanted. I could have warned her. I didn't. That's where the story breaks, if you want a clean place to point at. That's where you could say I made the wrong choice. But the truth is, I'd been making the wrong choice all along, just in smaller pieces. The night it went bad wasn't loud. It wasn't bloody. It wasn't a headline. It was a Thursday. The kind of night where the tourists were tired and the locals were restless. The kind of night where the pit ran slow and the slot floor was a sea of faces lit by machine glow. Around 2:10 a.m., a man in a gray jacket sat down at a blackjack table near the edge of the pit. He wasn't unusual, mid-30s, clean shave, hair cut short, no visible tattoos. He moved like he knew how to behave in a casino. Like he'd been in 1,000 of them and never lost his temper. He played a few hands, lost a little, won a little. Then he signaled for a drink and leaned back in his chair. Mara came through the pit carrying a tray. She stopped at his table and spoke to the dealer. Quick, professional. The man in the gray jacket looked up at her. On the camera feed, I saw his face change slightly. The smallest shift. Recognition. He said something to her. Mara didn't answer right away. She turned her head and looked at him. then looked away like she hadn't heard. He said something again. Mara's shoulders tightened. Not a big reaction, just enough. She leaned in, said something back, then walked away. The man watched her go. I zoomed the camera in a little. Not enough to be obvious, but enough to see the shape of his mouth moving as he spoke to the dealer. Then he stood up and followed her path out of the pit. I watched him cross the casino floor, moving through the crowd like he was slicing water. Mara went through an employee door near the back of the pit. The man hesitated, then moved toward that door. He didn't have a badge. He didn't have the right look for an employee. The door required a keycard. He should have stopped there. Instead, as if by chance, the door opened. Someone came out carrying a laundry cart. The man slipped in behind it. I sat up straighter. In the surveillance room, there were procedures for that. You call security. You track the subject. You log the time. I reached for the phone. Then the headset on my ear crackled. "Don't," Caldwell's voice said low. My hand stopped. I didn't know how he could be on that channel at that moment, but in a casino, the people with power always seem to be listening. "What?" I said quietly. "Leave it," he said. I stared at the monitor. The man in the gray jacket was moving down the employee hallway now. The camera feed in that hallway was older. Lower resolution. The fluorescent lights made everything look sickly. Mara was ahead of him, walking fast. I watched him close the distance. "Caldwell," I said, "he's following." "Leave it," he said again. "She knows what she's doing." I kept watching. Mara turned a corner near the service elevator. The man followed. For a moment, the camera view caught them both. Mara turning, her hand lifting as if to signal him to stop. The man leaning in close. Then they moved out of frame. There was a blind spot there. A bend in the hallway where the camera didn't cover because the building was old and the renovation never fixed it. The knot. My mouth went dry. I could have switched cameras. I could have tracked their path through other feeds. I could have sent someone. I could have insisted. Instead, I sat and stared at the empty hallway on the screen. The headset crackled with background chatter. A guard asking about a drunk guest. A supervisor asking for a fill. Routine noises. 2 minutes passed. 3. Then Mara came back into frame. She was walking alone. Her hair was still tight. Her vest still straight. Her hands empty. She walked at a steady pace. Not running. Not stumbling. But something in the way she held her shoulders had changed. It wasn't panic. It wasn't fear. It was control. The kind you force on yourself when you don't want anyone to see the shake. She went through another employee door and disappeared. A moment later, the man in the gray jacket came back into frame. He was adjusting his sleeve. He walked the opposite direction and exited through a different door. My stomach tightened in a way that felt physical, like a hand closing. I replayed the clip in my head, over and over. The blind spot. The 2 minutes. I picked up the phone again. The headset crackled. Caldwell again. "You don't need to do anything," he said. I stared at the monitors. "What happened?" I asked. Silence for a beat. Then Caldwell said, "Nothing that concerns you." I swallowed. "What happened?" I asked again. Caldwell exhaled. I could hear it through the mic, slow, controlled. "She had a conversation," he said. "That's all. She's fine." I didn't believe him, but I didn't have anything solid to hold on to. It would have been easy if Mara had come up to me afterward. If she'd said, "He cornered me." If she'd asked me to pull footage. If she'd looked shaken. She didn't. She went back to work. On the cameras, I saw her move through the pit the rest of the night. She did her runs. She called fills. She leaned into dealers and spoke quietly. At 5:40 a.m., when the sky outside the employee entrance started turning gray, I saw her clock out and leave. She walked alone across the employee parking lot, past the rows of cars under harsh lights. She didn't look back. I didn't sleep that day. I lay on my bed in my beige room and stared at the ceiling fan blades as they turned slow. The sound was soft and steady, like a whisper that never became words. I kept thinking about the blind spot. The next night I went to work early. I went into the surveillance room, logged in, and pulled the hallway footage from the service elevator camera. I rewound it and watched it again. Mara's shoulders tightening, the man leaning in, the empty frame. I watched Mara return. I watched the man return. I watched his sleeve. I stared at the timestamp. If I pulled more feeds, I could track where they went in the blind spot. There were other cameras near the service elevator doors. There was one in the service stairwell. There was one near the loading dock. It would take time, but I could do it. I started opening the other feeds. The door to the surveillance room opened. Caldwell walked in. He didn't knock. He saw what was on my screen. His face didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Reviewing," I said. "Why?" I swallowed. Because there was an unauthorized guest in the employee hallway. Caldwell stepped closer. He stood behind my chair again like he had before, only now the air felt heavier. "That's not your concern," he said. "It is," I said before I could stop myself. Caldwell's hand came down on the back of my chair, harder this time. Not a slap. A grip. "You listen," he said. His voice stayed low. That was worse than if he'd yelled. "You do your job. You don't chase ghosts. You don't get involved in things you don't understand." I looked up at him. "I understand enough," I said. His eyes narrowed. Then he smiled a little, and it didn't touch his face. "You like Mara," he said. That wasn't a question. I didn't respond. He leaned closer. "She's not what you think she is," he said. "And she's not going to save you from your own problems." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "What happened in that hallway?" I asked. Caldwell straightened. He looked at the monitors like they bored him. "She had a meeting," he said. "With who?" "With someone she knows," he said. "From her life." I stared at him. "You don't know her life," he continued. "You see her at work. You see her in a diner. That's not a life, that's a shift." My hands were still on the mouse. My knuckles were white. "Stop pulling footage," he said. "Stop asking questions, or you'll end up like her." The words landed like a coin dropping on a table. "Like her," I repeated quietly. Caldwell gave me a look, like I'd annoyed him. Then he turned and walked out. The door clicked shut behind him. I sat there for a long time with the monitors in front of me. On the screens, the casino floor moved. People shuffled. Dealers dealt. Lights blinked. Everything kept going. I did what Caldwell said. That's the part I have never been able to say out loud without tasting something bitter. I stopped pulling footage. I stopped asking questions. I watched my screens. I did my maintenance. I cleaned lenses. I logged routine incidents. I acted like the hallway was just a moment the cameras missed. Mara didn't come to the diner for a week. When she finally did, she sat at the counter like always, ordered eggs like always, and ate without looking around. I sat in a booth and watched her through the window's reflection. Her face looked the same, but her hands weren't as steady. It was subtle. If you didn't know to look, you wouldn't see it. When she lifted her coffee cup, her fingers tightened too hard around it. When she set it down, she did it a fraction too carefully, like she didn't trust the world to hold still. When she left, she didn't touch my arm. I followed her outside. The night air was cool. The neon across the street made her hair look almost black-blue. "Mara," I said. She stopped but didn't turn. I stood a few feet behind her because I didn't know if getting closer would make her move. "I saw you," I said. She took a slow breath. Then she turned and looked at me. Her eyes were flat, not dead, just guarded. "I know," she said. "What happened?" I asked. She studied my face for a long moment. Then she said, "Nothing you can fix." I didn't say. "You didn't do anything," she said, cutting me off. "That's the point." The words were simple, but they hit harder than shouting. I didn't know what to say. She looked away toward the strip, toward the glow in the sky. You ever notice how the light doesn't reach the ground? She said. It stays up here, in the air, like it's afraid of touching what's real. I swallowed. Caldwell told me to stop, I said. She nodded once, like she'd expected that. He tells everyone what to do, she said. What is he doing? I asked. Mara turned back to me. Do you want to keep your job? She asked. I didn't answer. She watched me for a second longer, then her mouth twitched, not quite a smile. There's your answer, she said. She started walking. I followed a few steps. Mara? She stopped again without turning. There's a thing about this city, she said. You can be right, you can be careful, you can even be kind, and it won't matter if you're standing in the wrong place. She turned then fully and looked at me like she was trying to make sure I heard every word. I stood in the wrong place, she said. Then she walked away into the night. After that, everything moved in a slow, steady slide. There wasn't a moment where alarms went off. There wasn't a dramatic confrontation. There wasn't a scene where Mara marched into an office with proof. It was quieter. A schedule change. Her shifts moved around. She got assigned to different pits. She got written up for small things. A missing signature. A late tray count. A rule she'd followed for years suddenly becoming a violation. You could see it on the cameras if you watched with the right eyes. People started giving her space in the hallways. Dealers stopped talking to her during lulls. Supervisors watched her too closely, like they were waiting for her to slip. Mara kept working. She kept her vest straight. She kept her hair tight. She kept her pace steady. But her eyes changed. They stopped looking outward. They turned inward like she was doing math she couldn't stop doing. One night, near the end of shift, she came into the employee hallway by the surveillance stairwell again. She stood at the keypad like before. This time, she lifted her hand and pressed a button. Just one. Then she stepped back and waited. The door didn't open. She pressed another. Nothing. On the camera feed, her face stayed calm. She didn't curse. She didn't slam the keypad. She simply stood there, trying codes, slow and deliberate, like she had all night. I watched from upstairs, my stomach tight. I could have gone out there. I could have opened the door for her. I could have asked what she needed. I stayed in my chair. After a few minutes, she stopped. She looked up at the camera. It was the first time I'd ever seen her look directly into a lens. For a second, it felt like she could see me through it. Then she turned and walked away. The next day, she didn't show up for her shift. Then she didn't show up again. I asked around without asking. I listened to the way people spoke in half sentences. She quit, someone said. She got fired, someone else said. I heard she got arrested, a security guard whispered, eyes wide like he wanted it to be true. No one knew, or no one wanted to say. Caldwell never mentioned her again. In the surveillance room, her face kept appearing on old footage for a while, in clips I pulled for unrelated things, in wide-angle views of the pit, moving through the background. Then, as the days passed and footage got overwritten, she faded, like she'd never been there. I kept going to work. I kept sitting in the diner. I kept walking at night because I didn't know what else to do. One night, a month later, I found her. Not in the way you're thinking. Not in an alley. Not in a hospital. Not in a news story. I found her in a place the city tries to forget it has. There's a stretch of road out past the industrial yards where the lights thin out. You pass storage lots stacked with shipping containers. You pass chain-link fences. You pass sand and scrub and the kind of wind that carries grit into your teeth. I'd driven out there because I couldn't stand the room anymore. Because the neon felt like it was pressing on my skull. I pulled over near a turnout where you could see the city glow in the distance without hearing it. I sat on the hood of my car and looked at the lights. They looked soft from that far away. Almost gentle. I heard footsteps on gravel. I turned, and there she was. Mara. She wore jeans, a plain jacket, no vest. Her hair was still pulled back but looser, like she didn't need it to behave anymore. She stopped a few feet away and looked at me. "You followed me?" she asked. "No," I said. "I didn't know you'd be here." She stared at me, then nodded like she believed it. "This is where you leave," she said. I remembered her question in the diner. "If you had to go to the desert right now, could you?" "You come here a lot?" I asked. "Sometimes," she said. We stood there in the wind. The city glow behind her painted the edges of her face faintly. Not enough to make her look beautiful. Just enough to remind you the light existed. "What happened to you?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "I made a report." My throat tightened. "About Caldwell?" "About patterns," she said. "About money moving wrong. About people making mistakes they weren't making." "And?" Mara looked at the city for a long time before she spoke. "They called me into an office," she said. "They told me I was confused. They told me I was seeing things. They told me I had a problem. I didn't say anything. They offered me a deal," she continued. "Quit quietly. Sign paperwork. Don't make noise. Go away." "And if you didn't?" Her mouth tightened slightly. "They said they would make it ugly," she said. The wind moved her hair. She tucked a strand behind her ear with a gesture that looked automatic, like she'd been doing it all her life. "I didn't want ugly," she said. "Ugly sticks." "What did you do?" I asked. She looked at me then. "I left," she said. The words were simple. I wanted to ask where. I wanted to ask if she was okay. I wanted to ask if she needed money, a place, a ride. I didn't. It wasn't that I didn't care. It was that I didn't know how to step into someone's life without messing it up. Mara shifted her weight on the gravel. "You came out here because you feel something," she said. I swallowed. I started, then stopped. She watched me. "You don't have to say it," she said. "People say things out loud and think it changes the shape of them." I stared at the city glow. "I should have helped you," I said finally. Mara's eyes stayed on the horizon. "You should have helped yourself," she said. I didn't understand that at the time. I do now. We stood there until the wind got colder. Before she left, she reached into her pocket and pulled something out. A small key card. She held it out to me. "I copied this," she said. "It doesn't open what I wanted, but it might open something you shouldn't be able to open." I stared at it. "Why are you giving it to me?" I asked. Mara's face didn't change. "Because you watched," she said. "And you're still there." I took the card. It felt like nothing, a thin piece of plastic. But my hand felt heavier. She turned and walked away into the dark, toward a car I hadn't noticed parked farther down. A small sedan with dust on the bumper. She got in and drove off without headlights until she reached the road. Then the lights came on and she disappeared. I sat on my hood with the key card in my hand and listened to the wind. I didn't use the card right away. I told myself I would. I told myself I needed a plan. I told myself I had to be careful. Mostly I told myself I was still the same person I'd been, the one who said yes because he needed the job. But the card stayed in my wallet. I felt it every time I took out cash. Every time I opened my ID slot. Like a reminder that someone had put something in my hand and expected me to do something with it. At work, the casino went on. The pit stayed full. The cage stayed busy. Caldwell kept walking like he owned the air. Mara's name stopped being spoken. New people got hired. They filled the spaces. They didn't know what had been there before. The cameras kept watching. I kept watching back. Then one night, in the surveillance room, I saw something small. A floor supervisor doing a drop. A tray moving where it shouldn't. A chip count adjusted too fast. A pattern. I paused the footage. I looked at the timestamp. I looked at the angle. And I realized something Mara had already understood. It wasn't one bad man. It wasn't one ugly moment in a blind spot. It was the whole shape of the place, tilted a few degrees. I took out the key card. I waited until the shift change, when the room was quieter and the guy next to me was on break. I walked down the stairwell, heart steady, not racing. That was what scared me. The calm. I went to a door I'd never had access to before. A side office hallway. A keypad. I slid the card. The light blinked. Green. The lock clicked. I stepped through. Inside, the air smelled like paper and cleaning chemicals. The hallway was narrow. Offices on both sides. Doors with little plaques. Compliance, accounting, security admin. I walked like I belonged there. That's another thing this city teaches you. If you move like you belong, people don't look up. At the end of the hallway was a door marked Storage. I slid the card again. Green. The door opened. The room inside was dim. Shelving units stacked with boxes. Old monitors. Spare keyboards. A printer that looked like it had been there since the 90s. And in the back, behind a shelf, a locked cabinet. I stood there for a long moment. I could hear my own breathing. Not fast, not panicked. Just steady. I didn't have a key for the cabinet. I wasn't a thief. I wasn't trained for breaking locks. But I did have a tool bag in my office. And I had learned how weak most locks are if you don't care about leaving marks. I went back upstairs. I got my bag. I came back down. I forced the cabinet open. Inside were folders, paper files. Not many. Not enough for a real archive. But enough for a story. Names, dates, amounts, markers, notes in the margins. I didn't understand all of it, not then, but I understood enough to feel my stomach tighten with the weight of it. Because it wasn't about one dealer skimming chips. It was about the casino protecting itself by letting certain things happen and blaming the people who couldn't fight back. It was about patterns. And Mara had been standing in the wrong place when she saw them. I took pictures with my phone. Not because I was smart, because it was the only way I knew. I put everything back as best I could. I closed the cabinet. I shut the door. I slid the card to lock it behind me. I went back upstairs to the surveillance room and sat in my chair like nothing had happened. The monitors kept glowing. The casino kept moving. My hands were steady on the mouse. But inside, something had shifted. I wish I could tell you that I took those pictures to the authorities. That I blew the whole thing open. That Caldwell got walked out in handcuffs. That Mara came back and smiled like a door opening. That's not how it goes here. I sat on those photos for weeks. I looked at them late at night in my beige room, the screen lighting up the wall. I tried to make sense of the notes. I tried to connect names to faces I'd seen on camera. I tried to figure out what part of it was illegal and what part was just ugly. I didn't sleep much. Then one morning, after I'd been up all night staring at a folder labeled with a date and a name I recognized, my phone rang. Unknown number. I stared at it until it stopped ringing. A minute later, it rang again. I answered. A man's voice, calm. "You've been somewhere you don't belong," he said. I didn't speak. "You're a smart man," the voice continued. "You know how things work. You know what happens when people misunderstand their place." My throat felt dry. "Who is this?" I asked. A pause. "Someone who watches," he said. I felt my stomach drop slightly. "Give back what you took," he said. "Walk away. You'll keep your job. You'll keep your life. That's generous." My hand tightened around the phone. "I didn't take anything," I said. The voice chuckled softly. Not humor, just breath. "You took your time," he said. "You took your curiosity. You took someone else's burden and thought it would make you clean." I couldn't breathe for a moment. "How did you—" "Don't," the voice said, cutting me off gently. "Just don't." Then the line went dead. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall. The city outside my window was bright in daylight, but it looked tired, like makeup under harsh lighting. That night at work, Caldwell didn't come into the surveillance room. He didn't need to. I could feel the eyes on me anyway. A camera tech knows when a system is being watched from above. Not because you see the watcher, because you feel the pressure of attention, like a hand on the back of your neck. I worked my shift. I didn't pull any footage. I didn't open any doors. When the shift ended, I went to the diner. I sat in the booth by the window, the same one. I waited. I didn't know what I was waiting for. Maybe Mara. Maybe a sign. Maybe the courage I thought would show up if I sat still long enough. The waitress refilled my coffee without asking. Her shoes squeaked on the tile. Outside, the neon started to glow again as the sky went dark. I took out my phone and opened the photos. I scrolled through them slowly, like I was trying to memorize them before they were taken away. Then I did something I hadn't planned. I deleted them. One by one. Not out of fear in the way people talk about fear. Out of a tired understanding that I was alone in a room I had chosen, and I didn't know how to fight something that lived in the walls. When the last photo was gone, I sat there with my phone in my hand and felt the weight in my pocket again. The keycard. I took it out and held it between my fingers. Thin plastic. Nothing. I walked outside and stood under the diner's sign. The air smelled like exhaust and fried food. Across the street, the casino's facade glowed like a promise that had been made too many times. I snapped the keycard in half. The sound was small. I dropped the pieces into the trash can by the curb. Then I walked. I walked through the side streets, past the loading docks and employee entrances, past the places where the lights didn't reach the ground. I watched the cameras mounted above doors, their red indicator lights blinking. I watched the shadows under them. I kept walking until the city thinned out and the desert air got colder. I ended up at that turnout again, out past the industrial yards, where you could see the city glow without hearing it. I sat on the hood of my car and stared at the lights. For the first time, I said her name out loud. Mara. The wind took it. It didn't change anything. It didn't make me clean, but it felt like acknowledging a marker, like touching the place on your arm where a bruise has been and realizing it still aches. I never saw her again. Not in person, but sometimes in the years after, I'd catch her in my mind the way you catch a face in a reflection. A woman in a diner at midnight, eating eggs like fuel. A shadow moving through a pit, hands busy, eyes clear. A figure standing at a keypad, looking up at the camera like she knew exactly who was behind it. I quit the casino 6 months later. Not because I grew a spine overnight. Not because I made a stand. Because I couldn't sit in that room anymore without feeling like the monitors were watching me back. I took a job fixing security systems for warehouses on the outskirts. It was quiet work, boring, honest in a plain way. Sometimes at night, I still drove through the city. Not the strip, not the bright parts. The service roads, the places behind the places. I'd sit in my car in a dark lot and watch the neon from a distance. It looks better from far away. Up close, it's just glass and tubes and dust. And sometimes, when the night is quiet enough, I think about that blind spot in the hallway. The 2 minutes the camera didn't see. I think about how easy it is to let something happen if you keep your hands still and your mouth closed. I think about how a place can teach you to do that and make it feel like survival. And I think about Mara standing in the wrong place, seeing the tilt of the room, and choosing not to pretend she didn't. That's what stays with me. Not the thread on the phone. Not the cabinet. Not Caldwell's voice in my headset. Her steady hands, even when they weren't steady anymore. The way she walked back into frame like she refused to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her run. The way she said, "You didn't do anything, that's the point." I don't know what her life became after she left. Maybe she found another city. Maybe she found a quiet street where the light does reach the ground. Maybe she sits in a different diner at a different counter, drinking coffee that tastes like it's been through a filter twice, looking at nothing in particular. Or maybe she learned what I learned much later. That leaving isn't always escape. Sometimes it's just moving your body out of a room so your mind can keep living. I've told myself a lot of versions of this over the years. Versions where I'm better. Versions where I'm worse. Versions where I did something that mattered. But when it gets late enough, and the city outside my window starts to feel like a stage set left up after the show, I come back to the simplest version. I watched, I knew, I did nothing. Then I did a little, too late, and I let it go because I didn't know how to carry it without being crushed. That's not a twist. That's not a shock ending. It's just what happened. And sitting here now across from you with the coffee cooling and the neon outside still humming, I can feel that piece of metal in my pocket again, even though it isn't there. It's the shape of what I didn't do. It doesn't go away. It just becomes part of how you stand, part of how you speak, part of how you look at light that doesn't reach the ground. When the waitress comes back and asks if we want a refill, I'll probably say yes out of habit. And when I walk out of here, I'll pull my jacket tighter, not because I'm cold, but because the night air always feels like it knows more than it says.
For more Vegas stories like this one, roll the dice and subscribe.